you're kind of waiting for this like magic bullet, of like, I'm going to go to premarital counseling and then I'm going to get married. When I say I do, I'm going to get to have sex with my wife and that's going to make me not want to watch porn anymore. That's 100% not true. And that will 100% not happen to you. I promise. You cannot marry your way out of a porn addiction.
Ooh, there's a quote. You cannot marry your way out of a porn addiction.
You
Hear that,
you
friends.
can't do it. And I'm going to take that further. You can't sleep your way out of a porn addiction. No amount of partners will pull you out of that if that's what you want to stop. No amount of regular, consistent, healthy sex with your spouse will pull you out of a porn addiction if you haven't gone to the root of the issue and dealt with why you're there to begin with.
Hi, welcome to Wild and Beautiful. We're Joanna Hyatt and Lauren Enriquez, your co-hosts who every week are helping you live out your faith in a way that's biblically rooted but culturally relevant. Okay, friends, Lauren Enriquez started a new job this week, so we're giving her a slight break to adjust to that. And in the meantime, you get producer Kyle back on, which is always a treat. Welcome back, Kyle.
I'm here, and I'm waving again, knowing that most people are going to listen to this only.
I'm sure they can see it.
Same thing if I recorded with Lauren. Yeah. They can, for sure.
Yeah. Today's topic, and I appreciate you actually were the one that suggested that we cover this, which means you actually do listen to what we're saying. So thanks for that. Because today's topic is one that we traditionally think of, oh, this is a guy's problem. But one, we are also seeing increasing usage among women. And then it's one that even though more men struggle with this, it very much affects women and the women in their lives and the women in culture and society. And so, friends, if you haven't figured it out, we're talking about porn. At some point, we'll have an episode someday that's like totally kid friendly. This one, we're just warning you, we're talking about pornography. We don't plan on getting explicit, but we will be talking. So if you don't want to explain what porn is to your kids, move them on out of the room.
And part of right now. Yeah.
Go. Part of the jump off is, a couple of things in the news. They've kind of been happening over the last few months. The big one is Pornhub. So finally, in August, MasterCard said that they would no longer process payments for Pornhub, which was a huge win because
and Visa.
And Pornhub is the biggest online distributor of pornography. Do I have that right? Did you say?
I would assume so. Yeah. I mean, I will throw a hand up and say anyone listening is willing to fact check any aspect of this. But yeah, I think it's pretty safe to say Pornhub, I think, is the largest online distributor of porn.
And they have child
over like any other site.
Right? Isn't that part of the problem? They have child pornography as well? Undocumented.
I don't know.
I've seen those stories. I've seen those stories of people who are like, that video was taken of me as a child and it's still up there. Listen, when you have a name like Pornhub.
If people are reaching out, like people that have been on the site, like as, I guess actors or I guess people in the films have been on the site, whether it's by their own choice or by someone else's choice. If they're reaching out saying like, hey, this was whenever I was a minor, like this was filmed whenever I was underage and it got uploaded and it's still there, then yeah, for sure. I don't think that they're outright advertising. I don't think they have like a tab that's like child porn over here. It's not like categorized. But that also speaks to one of the things that I'm sure we're going to get into in great detail, which is that, like, it's impossible for like the viewer to in any reasonable way verify or know with any amount of certainty if, how old these people are in the videos, whether they actually consented to this or whether they were coerced or trafficked into it. And there's just no way for anyone to really ever know who's watching this. And so whenever it comes to like combating the stigmas around porn and combating, this idea that it's okay, it kind of is an all or nothing argument,
Absolutely. What's interesting is that, as a culture, you have Pornhub, finally Visa and MasterCard not processing payments, finally Instagram kicked them off, although they keep trying to get an account. And you would think like anytime porn is in the news, the topic of porn, trying to censor it, that there would be this consensus as a society that says, this is really good. It's really good that we're putting limits on this. It's really good that we're trying to rein this in. It's really good that we are seeking to minimize the reach, the impact, the availability. And yet that's not what we see. Like surprisingly, there is I don't even know if it's broad, but there's a loud contingency that says, no, you're restricting freedom of expression. This is just art. It's not harmful? I mean, you were even talking too about how feminists have taken this up almost as a rallying cry.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that like, to kind of like, to speak to your point of people like being upset about restrictions being put around that, I think that is like, I mean, you could apply that argument to anything in today's society, but I think that it stems, and like, I'm not a sociologist or psychiatrist, or I'm not an expert in any of these related fields. And like a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, like I will talk about it from my own experience and my own opinion. So that's everyone's disclaimer right off the bat. But I think that one of the main problems is that for the most part, almost every individual in this country has adopted this idea of, I know what's best for me. You know, I know what's best.
Mm-hmm.
Like how you don't get to tell me what's good for me. And let me back up. Maybe I shouldn't say every individual feels that way. That is what everyone is told that they should think about themselves though. Like that
Right.
You know best for yourself. And a lot of these modern movements that you will see, you know, spanning any number of topics and any number of things that people are wanting to try and gain advocacy for, whether it's good or bad or you're for it or not, it kind of stems from this idea that like we know best, like we're in the group that's affected, and so like we know best, and like this is like a huge rabbit hole topic, and I'm not about to say that there are black and white answers to these issues. Some of them are nuanced, and some of them are on a case by case basis. I don't think this is one of them though. So it's really interesting whenever we think about like hearing about how restrictions are being put around something like porn, and then people getting upset about that. Like, who is this helping? Like, who is the porn industry helping? You know, like what is it doing other than just leeching off of society physically, emotionally, monetarily?
Well, the reality is most people who are involved in porn are there because they need money. They were trafficked or coerced into it. Their circumstances made them feel that they had to do this. And the handful, very small handful of people who sort of rise to celebrity ranks as porn stars, they are not representative of the standard experience. And even they will talk about how physically harmful, emotionally harmful it is. Mm-hmm. And so it's so ironic to me that feminists have taken up this cry. When we say feminists, we mean sort of the modern day feminist, not the first wave of feminism that really sought to put women on a level of equality.
Not the, hey, we want to vote and get paid equally.
This is the one that says like, we want to be able to kill our children. We want to basically turn ourselves into men. I mean, that's the great irony is that the current feminist movement is advocating for women to hack apart their bodies to turn themselves into men through transgender surgery, to attack their own fertility, and then with pornography to reduce themselves to their one denominator, the sexualized version, which again, it's like, well, how do you expect that a woman is going to be seen as this complex, capable, unique individual when you are asking for this whole business to be able to thrive? And it's all about how a woman's body gets used for another person's enjoyment, whether on screen or the person watching and consuming it. And I think that to me just shows the great inconsistency of where feminism is at today, that it's really not about empowering women to say, hey, how do we help these women work, own a job, have dignity? It's diminished them and it's demeaning.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I agree as much as I am capable of agreeing because I'm not a woman. I don't know what it's like to be a woman. It is a lot of like women that, for everything that we know, probably don't actively engage in like consuming porn. They're definitely not involved in the porn industry, but it's part of this broader, movement to, again, kind of back to my earlier point of like, well, like I know what's best. We know what's best. Like just stop telling us everything, no matter what, and let us make our own choices, no matter how horrible they are, And
it's condescending, I find, when it's one woman saying that to another. It's like women who say, but poor women need abortion. I'm like, I'm sorry. Yeah. So their babies are not as valuable as yours. I would never have one, but these women who are on welfare are going to be limited. Instead of saying, how do I help elevate her so that is not what she has to turn to?
Yeah, it's definitely the like, I'm in a tower and I'm like casting out commands and judgment onto
but I'm being so helpful. I'm just going to help.
I'm not participating
I'm going to help the poor people.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing. Another thing that's really ironic is that like a lot of these people, and I've read the articles, I've seen the tweets, like I don't have any specific one in mind, but anyone listening is probably knows what we're talking about. Like you've seen a lot of people over the years come out and speak in favor of women being able to choose to be part of the porn industry. And like, A, spoiler alert, most of them probably have not made that choice for themselves. But B, like, it's just insane to me that like their way of like their chosen method of activism is to just defend that they can continue to be part of this really horrible system and industry rather than using their platform and their fame and their wealth to actually try and get more people out of it who they know have been harmed physically, emotionally, mentally by this industry.
There's some testimonies of people who will talk about having been in the porn industry. And it's heartbreaking because to hear it is to realize this is not an empowering, freeing, experience for the individuals involved. I want to look at, you had, kind of touched on it, but let's unpack. I gave the rant of like, as a woman, this is why I think it's demeaning and it limits us and it minimizes us. But, from a guy's perspective, right? How does viewing pornography, how does being in a culture that is very porn saturated? I mean, listen, just because we don't see a full naked body on a billboard doesn't mean that we're not in a highly charged sexualized culture. I mean, my husband has told me it's incredibly difficult when he's just doing work online. Like he goes, there's ads popping up all day long that you could click and 3 or 4 clicks later, like, exactly where you're going to end up.
Absolutely.
And so as a guy who, generally guys are more visual. We know that's a stereotype, not every guy, but like as a guy, what is it like to grow up, to live, to try to be in healthy relationships with your wife, with other women, when this is sort of the pervasive background, and how is it affecting the way guys are viewing women? That was a really long way to get to a short question.
That's you and me both. Let's like shelve the relationship aspect of this for a second. We will absolutely get to that because that's where it always ends up. It always leads there. All of these problems for a lot of men, honestly, almost always manifest when they finally get into a relationship. It's really hard to see these things whenever you're like a single guy or living by yourself. It can be really difficult to recognize when you're like already hooked. And I think that's what's the hard thing about it, that a lot of guys, I think, need to talk about, a lot of young guys need to hear. And I think a lot of women, whether you're, a young woman, you have guy friends, you're a mom, sister, whatever, like need to be okay trying to kind of like recognize some of these signs and some of these patterns too, is that like, a lot of guys, whenever they will start to want to engage in this behavior, like they'll self-isolate, they will start spending a lot more time alone. And then whenever they do get around people, their behavior around, their guy friends, a lot of the times tends to be a little bit more crass. You tend to start making more inappropriate jokes because you've normalized seeing a lot of this behavior. And so you're more comfortable talking about it because it's less weird to you. So that's what's difficult about it, is because like it's this really, really gradual kind of like slow burn into now all of a sudden it's new, it's exciting, it's like it's secretive, you don't want to talk about it. And then all of a sudden, boom, instantly it's normalized. And so once an unhealthy behavior like this gets normalized for you, that's when you're in like the really, really critical like danger zone.
And I do think it bears repeating that while the majority of people consuming porn are men, increasingly this is becoming something for women. And I know that a lot of our audience is actually young women. And so, as you hear this, I wanted Kyle to come on to give a guy's perspective, but this may be something that you yourself are struggling with. And so this kind of applies to both. It's just whoever's viewing this, it is changing the way that you then think about people, the way you approach sexuality. I mean, we know that with teenagers that so many of them are kind of learning about sex through porn, and it's creating these very unrealistic expectations about how people want to have sex, what is appropriate to ask of somebody, how to treat somebody, aggressively. We're seeing this sort of aggression in sexual experiences that can be tied to a rise in pornography, because pornography does not portraying loving, committed relationships built on respect.
No, it's really not.
With brain chemistry, what's always fascinating to me is there is a real physiological component to this. So I think, we were talking about how when you do something that induces pleasure, your brain releases dopamine. I mean, nobody's going to say, wow, porn is really unenjoyable. We would say porn.
Yeah.
The reason people,
some people might, and that's fair. But
most people go back to it because there was something about it that was enjoyable in the moment. Now, afterwards, you may feel like complete dirt, or you may feel terrible about yourself or whatever. But in the moment, your brain responded positively to this. And yet there's this desensitization that happens, which you pointed out in how we interact with people, but also I think in how, like, the kind of porn that is consumed, right? Most people don't start off with this hardcore, really graphic, or even child porn. They start with what they think is just really something soft, some images, maybe some videos, but your brain needs more and more of a hit because it gets desensitized as well. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure that is tough too, to live in a sex-saturated culture where sort of there's just this baseline imagery all around us. It's that is kind of conditioning every single one of us in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, everything is over-sexualized now, which is...
I mean, TV shows, magazines, you can't go anywhere.
It's inevitable on some level, but it's borderline unavoidable at this point. It's really difficult to engage in any aspect of our culture now without dealing with some facet of over-sexualization of something, And I guess just to clarify, we're talking about art and media, particularly, and that definitely extends to marketing, but I guess, we're referring to those things when we say culture. I'm not going to say that, you walk into Subway and there's going to be like a poster on the wall.
No,
someone,
but just sort of like
doing something
in your
sexually
day.
explicit. But in your day though, you pretty much encounter everything throughout your day, whether you work from home or not. I mean, I would argue at this point, probably even more if you work from home, if you're on the internet a lot and you're on your computer a lot, you just see a lot of stuff. But,
and the temptation to just click or search or
that's what it is. Yeah. It's the access.
Yes. Access used to be a lot more difficult, right? You had to get in your car, you had to drive to some place, you had to buy a thing. People had to see you walk in, you risk that anyway.
Yeah.
You don't risk any of that now. You can get stuff mailed to you. You can have, the access on your phone and on your computer, which is why I'm a big advocate of teenagers not having a smartphone, because you've handed your kid a computer and said, have a nice time. And they have access to everything that is out there.
A lot of the times whenever people are exposed to porn, it's not because they sought it out themselves. It's because someone else showed it to them or someone else gave them access to it. And as a young guy, that's also something that's really probably not the case anymore. A lot of young dudes probably have phones or computers and they've probably just look it up on their own because they see it in society. I mean, I would argue that you probably wouldn't even have to go to an actual porn site today if you wanted to consume some type of over-sexualized, sexually gratifying content. You can do it on TikTok. You can do it on YouTube.
Absolutely.
You can do it on all types of social media platforms. You can do it on Twitter. You can have access to a number of things.
Well, that brings up a question that I know I've heard from people as I've spent years talking about sex and relationships and healthy, guardrails and stuff like that. How do we protect our kids, and how do we equip our kids, not for if they see something, but for when they see or encounter something, whether they sought it out, whether, they Googled the wrong thing and didn't know what to click on, or someone showed it to them, because it's inevitable that our kids are going to encounter this content. So, as a guy, what would you say? Hey, here's conversations I wish I'd had. Here's conversations I'm going to have, because you have a child. You have a young son, and I have 4 daughters. What do you think are some ways that we help protect our kids and then also prepare them?
Yeah, I think not relying on someone else to do it, no matter how much you trust them or believe in their own opinions about the matter or their own ability to do it. You have to take responsibility as a parent or as a guardian or as a leader to the young people in your life. I think being honest with them right off the bat about, the things that that it will harm later on in their life when they get into a relationship with somebody. I think that that's like a really important place to start, especially with young guys. I think, framing the argument from the perspective of like, it's not worth it, I think is a really good way to do it, because it's honestly not. It's really, really hard to break out of the cycle of being addicted to porn and consuming that regularly. It's really, really hard.
And people don't realize that.
It's a process addiction.
They do not realize that.
Yeah, people don't realize that. Porn is a legitimate process addiction. No, it is not like a drug addiction. It is not chemically induced, but it does alter your brain chemistry. It does, send dopamine to your brain whenever you consume it. And then you being able to like regulate your own, dopamine triggers is exactly the type of thing that puts you into a place to be in a process addiction. And that is very similar to a lot of other types of addiction. So, again, I'm going to circle back to my disclaimer. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a doctor at all. I can tell you the things that I've learned, but once if you want to learn more about the actual science of it, there's a lot of great articles online about it, and you can read all about it. It's fascinating. But yes, porn's a legitimate addiction. And it can be almost impossible at times to break out of this cycle, especially if it's something that you do in isolation and you have a lot of opportunities to be alone. It's really hard. Not everyone that, watches porn or has watched porn or will watch porn will get addicted to it at all. Not all people will.
Right.
It's definitely a danger. It's definitely a threat to everybody, but some people just don't feel the same way about it. Some people just were never really into it. That doesn't mean that they didn't have things that they struggled with, but like it, there is a varying degree of response to it, but because of how accessible it is, I think, I sent you a link to an article, and I think in the article they said as of like 2020, I think something like 90 or 91% of men had viewed porn, and like 60% of women, something like that. So yeah, I think the takeaway is that, yeah, it absolutely affects women way more than I think the average person would know or think about. But basically all guys have to deal with this. So,
well, the average age of consumption for like first consumption for a boy used to be 11. And I think that number has dropped to 8 years old.
Yeah.
And so the reality is
that's
and
crazy.
it's like anything with our kids in this culture right now. You can take one of two approaches. You can stick your head in the sand and you can think, my child's never going to encounter this. I've taken them to, a little shack in the mountains, and this is where we shall live. But the more probably honest and helpful approach is to say they will encounter these things. So how do I begin to layer on the conversations? It's like when I talked to, my oldest, and we had our first conversation about what sex is. It's not the whole conversation. It's not everything. Sure. It's not all the good, all the bad. You're laying that baseline sort of foundation to then build on. And so if you have young children, it could be saying things like, here's why mom doesn't want you online. This is why dad, wants to supervise. But you may come across something and it may make you feel uncomfortable, or it may be surprising, or you may see it and you're like, this kind of looks interesting, but something about it makes me want to hide it. I want you to come to me. And I'm not here to make you feel bad about it. I want to talk about that with you. And I want to help you understand what you've seen, or someone may show that. And then I would, my kids are just starting to get there, but then I would think building on that and helping them understand that when they see something that makes them kind of instinctively want to hide it, that's a good thing to bring to mom and dad, but that they're not going to be in trouble for it. I think that's the disconnect, right? And that's where shame comes in, is shame says you are the problem. You've got to keep it hidden. And that doesn't go away. Whether you're 10 or you're 50, shame says don't tell anyone because they'll think you're the worst. And that's such a lie.
Guilt says I did wrong. Shame says I am wrong. And whenever you start this, adopting this negative core belief that like you are wrong and you're the problem, no one would want to talk about that and bring that up. It would take an unbelievably like weirdly adversely strong emotional person to like admit that about themselves and then bring it up and then be proactive about seeking out help.
Right.
And that's the type of person that would probably ironically not be struggling with this to begin with. So yeah, you're not going to want to open the door to make them feel like they have to hide certain behaviors, which as a parent, I think that this just goes in general, building a foundation and fostering an environment where your children feel safe to talk to you about things, I think that's like step one. Just like whatever you do daily, like hourly on a minute by minute basis, just continually fostering an environment where your children feel safe and comfortable talking to you about things. Because if they feel like they can, they will.
Yes.
And especially if you identify things ahead of time that they're going to experience, and then they go experience those things and be like, oh, mom and dad said this might happen. Then now they believe you because you're kind of this like weird fortune teller who controls their time, So it's, everything that you can do. So, but the approach that I feel like doesn't work as well, in my opinion, is the outlining like that this is wrong behavior and it should be avoided without really going into why. It's okay to say it's wrong, but I think that anytime you tell a child that something is wrong and you don't tell them why, you're kind of setting them up for failure and you're doing them a disservice because you're expecting them to just kind of blindly submit to your authority, but you're not always going to be around, and they're not going to like submit to your authority if you're not in the room and they're 12 and like all their other friends are peer pressuring them, and then that person they had a crush on walks in the room. You know what I mean? Like that's not a system that you can trust. So, arming your child with information and respecting them as the future adult that they're going to be, I think is the right approach within reason and within certain boundaries of not being too explicit.
It's age appropriate.
Yeah, but be age appropriate.
Right?
Yeah,
the conversation you're going to have with your son when he's 16 versus the conversation you're going to have with him when he's 8 are very different. And one approach I take to our kids and is these early years, I'm really trying to emphasize and reinforce and point out the positive of life. Like, as a Christian, I see there's a way to live that is for our flourishing and is for our good. And you don't even have to be a believer to look around and kind of start to say, that seems like a better route. And so pointing out to my kids, if we watch a movie or we read a book to say, oh, how do you think that made that person feel? And what do you notice about this relationship? And oh, they seem sad. Why is it? And helping them begin to identify how certain behaviors lead to certain emotions or results and outcomes. Because we know that kids' prefrontal cortex isn't formed. And so they don't have that cause and effect. But if they start to build a framework for what is positive and good and beautiful, then as things come into that, you have something to contrast it with, to say, oh, okay, that may have been interesting to watch, but let's talk about what this is actually telling us. Oh, you're right. Like compared to this other thing over here, and kids naturally gravitate to what is good and true and right when they're little. And so being able to reinforce that helps you then have something to refer to when they come up against essentially what I would call a counterfeit. Porn is a counterfeit of what sex and sexuality and relationships should be. And they won't be trained to recognize a counterfeit if they haven't spent a lot of time with the real deal. Yeah. And obviously as children, that only means talking about it. Right. So, but even the real deal of like reinforcing like, hey, this is what good relationships look like. And you don't have to talk about messed up relationships. All you're saying is like pointing to what does respect look like? What does love look like? What does, valuing the person and versus really treating them to be something to use? Those are concepts that kids understand and they apply beyond pornography and sexual relationships. Totally. And I think that like one of the like strongest things that you can do early on in your child's life to combat a lot of these types of things is to just model what a loving, healthy relationship looks like, and that's why like, not saying that like if you're a single parent or, that you can't do that. Obviously you can. Obviously you can model unbelievable, examples of love to your children and to your family. But, regardless of what your family situation, your family structure looks like, I think just like modeling what healthy, reliable, dependable love actually looks like, whether you're a believer or not, modeling what safety and trust looks like so that they learn what safety and what trust feel like, and they know that they can rely on that. I think that that's probably the most important building block in all of this. How does being addicted to porn, or being a regular consumer of porn, someone may even say, I'm not addicted, although I would argue, try going without it for a while. But how does being a regular consumer of pornography play out in relationships. You know, you touched on, hey, as a guy, you start to get kind of coarse in the way that you joke or the way that you talk about women. You go from it being private to a more public interaction. But then what does that look like when you're actually dating someone and then marry them? Because we know that people who spend time looking at pornography when they're single and they're like, well, I don't have anybody, that doesn't go away the minute you walk down the aisle.
No. Oh man. Yeah. So
your pause there was everything.
Yeah. For anyone listening who is married and hasn't been married for very long or is getting married, if we're the first person to tell you this, then I think it does both of us a great honor. Marriage absolutely will not in any way solve any of your premarital problems.
No, neither does it make everybody in the world. Yeah, it makes them worse. And neither does it make everybody in the world suddenly ugly. Like, don't think like, oh, any attraction I had, any struggles, like that goes away. My eyes are only for one. You're like,
you will wake up on your honeymoon and see really attractive people. That's going to happen.
It's really unfortunate, especially if you vacation in a sunny spot.
Oh, especially if you go somewhere where attractive people notoriously flock. Like the beach or tropical destinations. So anyway, but yeah, so with the relationship aspect of it, I will say that, you know, I think that, you know, as a guy, if you consume a lot of porn, and again, like Joe said, like if you don't think you're addicted, you might not be, you genuinely might not be. That's great. And that's perfectly fine. But stop. Tell yourself to stop for 30 days and then see how it makes you feel. And then you tell yourself what you think about, you know, your own, like your own involvement addicted with this particular, you know, type of material. So, I will say that porn can create unrealistic expectations, which then turns into entitlement, which then turns into resentment. So whenever you go through the process of dating someone and you hide viewing porn from them, you don't talk about it, then maybe let's just say that you're the type of person that like consumes porn regularly, but you want to get married, you're in a relationship right now and you want to stop because you know that it, like you've heard that it could be bad for your marriage and you don't want to deal with that. That describes a lot of people, definitely describes a lot of men in the church. You're kind of waiting for this like magic bullet, you know, of like, I'm going to go to premarital counseling and then I'm going to get married. When I say I do, I'm going to get to have sex with my wife and that's going to make me not want to watch porn anymore. That's 100% not true. And that will 100% not happen to you. I promise. You cannot marry your way out of a porn addiction.
Ooh, there's a quote. You cannot marry your way out of a porn addiction.
You
Hear that,
you
friends.
can't do it. And I'm going to take that further. You can't sleep your way out of a porn addiction. No amount of partners will pull you out of that if that's what you want to stop. No amount of regular, consistent, healthy sex with your spouse will pull you out of a porn addiction if you haven't gone to the root of the issue and dealt with why you're there to begin with. So, yeah, but to all of the people that are looking to get married, young people, you can't marry your way out of this. If you're currently in a dating relationship and you're having the marriage talks, bring this up. It's going to suck. It's absolutely not going to be fun to talk about. It's going to be super awkward and it might even be a little tense and kind of turn into an argument. That's okay. Do all of that. Take all of that, wear the uncomfortable weight in the room as a badge of honor that you're actually confronting something that's going to do, you know, leaps and bounds for your future in terms of like how good your relationship is going to be able to, you know, be sustained and maintained after dealing with this as opposed to just not dealing with it all. So
I do it now instead of 5 years into your marriage because you think it won't affect your spouse. But let's look at what does it do in marriage when you are viewing porn and your spouse doesn't know or you think they don't know.
You think they don't know. Yeah. And both of those are very real situations. There are people whose spouses genuinely have no idea. And there's people whose spouses have known for a long time and they haven't said anything, you know? There's a whole, you know, gambit of these situations, of these different types of people. First of all, I will say that like, if you're dating or married to someone and the porn thing has come up, give that person grace, whether they're a man or a woman. If they're a guy, definitely, you know, men aren't used to being given grace with things that they struggle with just in general, especially not by society. I'm not saying feel sorry for men at all. It's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying
but
like
just
be
know that
human.
That's not the expected response when a guy
just know that men usually aren't used to receiving grace whenever it comes to things like this, and definitely whenever it comes to, what I would call, sexual malfeasance. And so it's not something that men are used to being met with grace. That doesn't mean that there aren't consequences, and that doesn't mean that you don't have a right to be firm or angry or reprimanding. It doesn't mean any of those things, but it means that among all of those things that might be necessary, grace should also be there. And I think it's up to you to decide whether that's the first thing or the last thing, but it should be there. You should have grace in this situation. If you want to be angry first, that's your right. If you want to be gracious first, and that's how you want to set it up, great, then be angry. But no matter what, no matter how you move through this, respect the other person enough to understand that, like, yes, they make their own choices, but there might be an aspect of it that they have less control over than you think. So the grace will go a long way into making them feel like they have someone on their side to stopping it, as opposed to them being put in a jail cell and you're on the other side holding the keys, So in the context of a marriage, I would say talk about it. Talk about it right away. Talk about it with someone who you trust to mediate this topic. If that's a professional, that's best case scenario. But if it's a pastor or someone that you feel can lead you through that conversation, that's great too.
And I think sometimes the misconception with Christians is I'm just going to pray my way out of it.
Oh yeah.
Sorry. Prayer is a part of it. Yeah. Like, bring prayer into it, but also be realistic of, like, you are going to need to do a little bit more than that. So, I'd say whether you're married, you're single, wherever, if you're listening to this and you are struggling, you're thinking, shoot, I don't know if I can go 30 days. The thought of 30 days makes me internally panic. How do we start on the process of recovery and healing? What are some resources? Yeah. What are some things that you've seen or experienced that are helpful, so that we can end with hope?
Yes. So I think that, like, the best resources that we have available right away that we don't have to go look for are our community, because addiction grows in isolation, and the less you isolate yourself and the more you connect with other people and put these things out there that you're dealing with, the better chance you have of being able to trust and believe that you actually can stop certain behaviors. So, and even if it's once a week, even if it's like every Friday night, my spouse goes out with her friends and then that's my time. I go into my office or whatever, that's, once a week may not sound that bad, but if it's every week for as long as you can remember, that kind of is a problem. And you've now ritualized an aspect of this, and you have come to rely on it, and you probably look forward to it. You probably plan ahead to it. You probably for sure plan around it. So that's something that you need to take into consideration, but use your community. Stop isolating. Accept the fact that you're going to have to tell someone that something embarrassing, something uncomfortable, something that you don't like, that you don't want to even talk about at all with yourself, let alone someone else. Accept that. Just accept that. It's not easy. It's definitely easier said than done, but that can be a really, really effective first step, is to just accept that you're not going to solve it on your own. You're not. Willpower won't get you out of an addiction. I'm sorry. I don't believe that. If someone has something contrary to say to that, I will correct myself presented with evidence. I've just never seen any evidence of someone actually having legitimate willpower and stopping an actual, realized addiction. So don't trust that you're strong enough to stop, and don't tell yourself, like, when you're done for the night that was the last time, because that's ridiculous. You're wasting your own time at that point. It's just a total lie. So, I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm just trying to, like, put the reality out there and to say that, like, if you've thought any of these things, great. Now you have someone to identify with, and you have something that you can recognize. This is the next step. There's a ministry called XXX Ministries that has a lot of groups online that you can, we'll put the link in the show notes. Yes. It's an online church network and organization that deals with trying to get people out of addiction to porn and trying to get people out of a lot of really unhealthy sexual behaviors, and they can plug you into groups of people that you can talk to. You can email people, you can chat with people about this anonymously. You can kind of go about it any way you want, but if you don't want to talk to someone in your real life about this, that's where I would go. I would go either there specifically or somewhere like that, because you have to bring someone else into the situation to interface with it.
Yes. And I would say too, your stat about 91% of men have looked at porn, 60% of women, that should in some ways be reassuring, because the chances are that when you go to tell someone, it's not going to be a what? It's more of a, you too. Okay. And so, while the enemy would love for us to think this is just me and my problem and I got to stay quiet with it, the reality is when we talk about it, we find out other people are most likely struggling, with it. And if you're in a church, you're in a small group and you have relationships, find one person who you can sit down and talk to. A lot of churches nowadays have these groups called Celebrate Recovery, and it's for addiction. It's not just for alcohol addiction. It's not just for drug addiction. Talk to your pastor for what are the resources they recommend. XXX Church or XXX Ministry is a great one, and they've been around a long time. Another one is, and more for like information, if you're kind of like on the fence, Fight the New Drug is so great at pulling together resources, and especially if you're engaging with people or you yourself or somebody's like, I'm not a follower of Christ. Fight the New Drug comes at it from the scientific approach. They come at it from the social approach. And there's a lot of information there to help you understand the impact to yourself, to the people around you, in the porn industry, and how you can move forward and realize like you're not actually alone. You're not a weirdo. You're not the only person out there who has this problem.
I don't recommend talking to someone of the opposite sex about this.
Agreed.
I don't think that would be a very healthy thing to do, just because it's really difficult to kind of relate on a one-to-one level with something like this, especially something that we're talking about, like a distortion of our own sexuality. That could be really difficult for someone of the opposite sex to like understand what it's really like from that perspective.
I would say too, don't lean on your spouse or partner to be your accountability person. That's not fair to them. And sometimes people think, I'll just tell my wife or my husband, I'll ask them to hold me accountable. No, that's not going to work. That's going to make it really unhealthy. Work.
And it's not that idea isn't in good faith. And I think I understand where people come from whenever they make that argument, because they want to be inclusive and they want to keep things that like, it's a show of like love and, to like, I'm going to like let my spouse know, like, this is a really difficult thing for relationships to navigate, let alone your significant other now being your anchor through overcoming this. That's very hard. It's very hard. Definitely tell your spouse, definitely have honest conversations and be open, be willing to have them be angry about certain things, but understand that if you guys aren't throwing the D word around and you're not talking about getting divorced, that everything can be overcome. It's okay. People have gone through a lot worse and made it. But if you're a guy and you're struggling and you bring it up to someone that you're in a relationship with and they get angry, they have every right to. Let them. Don't get defensive. Allow it, to humble you and allow them to work through that process. And then after they're done being angry, a lot of the times you'll be really surprised at how supportive they can be with you actually going through the process of getting help and stopping, certain behaviors. So that's what I would say about that. Don't get defensive and don't turn it into an argument if they're angry that you lied and hurt them in secret.
Thank you. I mean, I think this conversation is the kind that we will repeatedly have because it is so prevalent and it's so entrenched. But thank you for being willing to come on and kind of start it. November is No Porn November per Fight the New Drug. And so that was part of why we wanted to highlight it. Don't worry, next week we're going to talk about Advent, friends. And that's like a totally different tone.
It's totally different.
But part of being people who live a wild and beautiful faith is that we uncover those areas in our life that are kind of ugly, that are kind of uncomfortable, and that, by exposing them, by dealing with them, we are stronger, better, healthier people, living out a more hopeful and realistic faith to people. So thank you for joining us for this conversation today. As always, feel free to write us at wildandbeautifulpodcast@gmail.com. Rate, share. And this one you may want to just quietly send to somebody that maybe needs to hear this, but it is an important topic. So please don't stop having these conversations, friends.